Remember when you were an annoying little hyper bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world? Your parents couldn't trust to give you candy. No, 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 no. Because if they did, you may just drive them to their one last nerve that they have, and they'll start to consider driving to the local orphanage to drop you off just to never see you again so they can finally live a peaceful life once again. You didn't experience that? Are you sure? Oh shit. Dance Dance Revolution was a godsend product for our parents at home. Finally, something that could take the edge off for hours on end. Once I was finally done with the 4-hour session of dancing solely to Captain Jack and Butterfly, I could finally lay down my little head at night to sleep, my restless 8-year-old ADHD soul. But what happened to Dance Dance Revolution? After PlayStation 2, it seemed to disappear off the face of this planet. Well, at least to play at home. It's still kicking at the arcades, along with many other makers coming out with their own versions. But we all know Dance Dance Revolution was the real OG here. The same can be said for other rhythm games such as Guitar Hero or Rock Band or Taiko no Tatsujin. The newest generation of kids will have no idea that these games even existed.
What's going on, kiddo?
Oh, just playing some games on my phone.
Playing a game on my phone. back in my day, the games that we played, we had some good ones. Some of the best, you know. They weren't games on your phone, you know.
Well, what are some of the games you used to play?
I mean, where do I begin? Guitar Hero.
What's Guitar Hero?
What did you just say?
Maybe if we brought them back, we could actually get them off their damn iPads and actually give them some healthy stimulation of learning a fake instrument or dance moves. I can admit that they were a great way to stay active at least. But what's the deal? Why was it that something that was so popular was never able to make a comeback? If anything, I feel like electronic music is actually getting really popular again, so it makes sense that Dance Dance Revolution would make its way back into homes. What gives? I decided to dig a little further and do some research and figure out what happened to these rhythm games and why they haven't came back yet. So before we expand into the rise of rhythm games in the late 90s to mid 2000s and its eventual downfall with the late 2000s, let's dive into its origins first to get a full picture. Now, you may be thinking that Dance Dance Revolution was the first of its kind, but really it all started with Pa-Rappa. Pa-Rap, Rap-Pa-Pa, Pa-Rappa, Rap-Pa. Rapper the Rapper was the first rhythm game to start it all. It is considered to be the true first rhythm game, and led the way for many future games to have a similar rhythm controller-based format, like Britney's Dance Beat that I was so obsessed with in 2002.
It's Britney, bitch.
Rappa was first released in 1996 in Japan for the PlayStation, and then eventually released worldwide in 1997. It was highly praised by critics for its music, animation, and unique gameplay. It was truly and genuinely the first of its kind, and has been considered by many as one of the best video games to ever be released, even up there with Pokemon Red and Blue and Resident Evil. It has maintained a dedicated following since its original release, and Sony even had a remastered version for PlayStation 4 in 2017 for its 20th year anniversary. It was truly an iconic game, and personally I have some fond memories of playing this as a child myself. The songs were catchy and it had high replayability. Shortly after Pa-Rappa, Konami came out with Beat Mania, which saw its way into arcades and PlayStation as well. What made this game even more unique up against Pa-Rappa was that not only was it a rhythm-based game, which was still considered a new and upcoming genre, it added an additional layer by using a physical keyboard and turntable, rather than just a controller. Each button on the device would correspond to a specific key shown on the screen. Although it was pretty successful in Japan, it didn't gain nearly enough traction in the US, and only released one version of it for PlayStation in the Western market. But because these games were mostly developed by Japanese game companies and tended to do well there, they still continued to release several other rhythm games.
No longer tied down. Now you can move your body freely.
One of them being the most successful to date. Can you guess it? Dance Dance Revolution. In 1998, Konami, or their music division called Banami, released their first version of Dance Dance Revolution in arcades. And in 1999, it was officially released on PlayStation in Japan, marking its first time in homes. It wasn't until 3 years later, after the Japanese release in homes, that it was released in the US in 2001 on PlayStation as well. Just like Beatmania, Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR as we'll call it, had a physical component to it outside of the typical controller. To use on a home console like the PlayStation, you needed to purchase a separate dance pad. The player must step on the arrow associated with what's on screen to the beat of a song of choice. You could only get so many misses until it would abruptly end the song, ending in a fail. If you continuously hit the right notes at the right time, you'd be met with a score at the end of the song that you could brag to your friends about. I remember many nights when I was a kid, we'd have this thing called tween hangout nights, and it'd be in the back room of the library. There would always be this one girl that would always bring Dance Dance Revolution, her PlayStation, and several different dance pads. Honestly, it was such core memories, and that's how I personally really got into Dance Dance Revolution. And what's great about the game is it didn't really matter your skill level of actual dancing or even just the game itself. There were several different levels you could choose based on your skill. I think a lot of recognition of the game was gained from people playing extremely hard levels at the arcades, and people just watching for the pure astonishment of how fast a person's legs could move. Insane foot-eye coordination. Dance Dance Revolution focused on electronic dance music for its playlists, which at the time of the 2000s was a very popular music genre and helped pave the way of fame for the game. It was met with huge success, selling 135,000 units in just the US alone. It garnered high reviews and ratings from many different publishers and was the highest grossing arcade game in 1999. Dance Dance Revolution was on top of the world when it came to this video game genre, and they dominated the rhythm game market for several years to come, releasing game after game after
Game after game.
an honorable mention in the rhythm game realm was Taiko Drum Master for the PlayStation 2 in 2004. Taiko was already an immensely successful arcade game in Japan for several years before, but this was the first North American release and specifically made for North America. This was similar to Beatmania and Dance Dance Revolution, but focused on a physical drum and drumsticks. It received generally favorable reviews according to Metacritic. Up until this point, though, mostly the only developers that came out with these rhythm games were Japanese developers. That is until 2005 when Guitar Hero came out. Keeping up with the theme of physical components, the Guitar Hero game came with a guitar-like instrument with 5 colorful buttons on the neck of the guitar. Guitar Hero was released by American publishers Red Octane and later acquired by Activision. Since the game consisted of mostly popular English spoken rock music, it further boomed the rhythm game genre for the Western market. Although electronic music was big during this time, Dance Dance Revolution was made by a Japanese developer, so it mostly had indie artists and Japanese artists on it. Guitar Hero and eventually Rock Band included large global bands such as Aerosmith, the Beatles, and other huge artists. During this time, Dance Dance Revolution was releasing new versions of the game during this time as well. At this point in 2007, rhythm games were considered to be one of the most popular video game genres behind other action games. But this became somewhat short-lived, and by 2009, the rhythm genre was completely oversaturated and dying. This led to a 50% drop in revenue for these game publishers. Sales of rhythm games, which totaled to 1.47 billion, yes, that's billion with the B, in 2008, reached only 700 million in 2009, with many of them announcing an indefinite hiatus from future titles. This is also partially due to the recession that was going on in the late 2000s that had a huge impact on the gaming industry as a whole, and honestly had an impact on everyday American life. There were always the giants of Dance Dance Revolution, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, and Taiko, but other developers were noting this popularity within this rhythm game genre and were trying to capitalize on this trend themselves as well. Eventually, the market was flooded with way too many spin offs of said giants and also new ones like DJ Hero and Band Hero, just to name a few of them. Honestly, at what point do we start to realize we should put that same time and effort into learning a real instrument? Going to GameStop was completely overwhelming, especially if you were new to the rhythm genre. Each game had their own distinct physical components that you would need to buy. So if you had a guitar for Guitar Hero and you also owned Rock Band, you wouldn't be able to use the Guitar Hero guitar for Rock Band. You would have to buy two separate guitars. This was getting way too expensive for the average consumer, especially during a recession. And they did not have the cheap price tag attached to them either. Especially when you started to get into a game like Rock Band, where they had several different instruments and components that you would have to buy for them. The more intricate the game was, the more expensive it would be to get into it. For Dance Dance Revolution, at least, it was just like a flimsy, floppy gamepad. But for Rock Band, even if you wanted just the drums, you need the drum set and the seat to be able to do it. In fact, Harmonix's very own CEO admitted to Guitar Hero and Rock Band being the most expensive video games on the market at the time. These games were just causing music game fatigue. Not to mention, if you were a fan of all these different rhythm games, you needed a place to store all these different components. There's so many of them. And they weren't tiny either. It became a hassle for so many people. What also caused the decline of rhythm games were the shift from physical to digital games. Mobile gaming and Facebook games like Farmville started trending in the late 2000s. It was just simpler, cheaper, and sometimes even free and less space consuming. At this point, gaming was becoming more about convenience than spectacle. Let me give you an example. Think about music in general at this time. We were making really big strides and new changes in this industry. Less and less people were buying physical CDs and instead downloading music onto their iPods. We were entering into a new era where a lack of physical products was valued more. Not to mention, multiplayer gaming had moved online and onto computers. Rhythm games just weren't able to make that leap where they went from the home consoles to PCs. And there's a good reason for it. One, we already had all the physical components that only worked for, say, the PlayStation, so now you needed to buy them again if you wanted to have it for the PC. Again, expensive. Also, you needed a PC that could even support these kind of graphics on these heavy games like Dance Dance Revolution and Rock Band. And unless you were a gamer, you likely didn't have that. Although DDR and the likes tried to get into PC gaming, it just never really took off, honestly. They still have a cult following within arcades, and you can clearly see that if you go to one, but it just never made its way back into homes. Also, another point of the decline was the social and party aspect of these games. Think of Rock Band. Usually you would have many people over, each person taking turns on the different instruments. It was a lot of fun that way. It just wouldn't be the same if we were all huddled around a smaller PC monitor and maybe subpar speakers. It's just not the same experience. And that makes sense why it only went to arcades after it died within homes, honestly. The rhythm genre didn't completely die, but they didn't largely rely on these physical components anymore to be able to play at home. This made the barrier to entry a lot less expensive and just more convenient. Games like Just Dance for the Wii in 2009 was massively successful for this reason, and still making new releases to this day. But old school rhythm games that did need the physical components like DDR or Guitar Hero or Taiko are still in arcades today. But the days of having them at home are pretty much almost completely dead. I mean, the last Dance Dance Revolution game that you could play at home was on the Wii in, can you guess? 2011. That was almost 15 years ago. Holy shit, there are high schoolers now that don't know this existed. The thing that really irks me when I go to an arcade and go with some friends and I want to play Dance Dance Revolution, there's always someone hogging the machine. They're the kind of people that are there several days a week for hours on end and can't just give it up to me for a few songs for a normie like me. It is so frustrating. Apparently, there is an open source game similar to Dance Dance Revolution called Step Mania for the computer, but it's just not the same as turning on your PlayStation and going right at it. A company called Exergame is even trying to sell Step Mania onto a machine that looks just like DDR, and they're specifically trying to sell it to gyms. I personally have never seen it make its way to gyms, but I also can't imagine it fitting in a gym setting. I mean, look at this setup here. Beautiful. This doesn't look like a gym. Does this look like a gym to you? The best idea I saw on the Dance Dance Revolution subreddit was a user suggested Konami rebrands DDR as a fitness-centric Peloton competitor with competitive events, leaderboards, tracking your workout, and etc. I so wish this could be a thing, but unfortunately it looks like nothing over the past decade has really taken off. Since the recession in 2008, it really seems like things have slowed down for the rhythm genre. There have been some games here and there that have been released, but they never really seem to stick around all that long. In 2008, Tap Tap Revenge came out on iPhones, which essentially is DDR for your fingers on the phone. Surprisingly, it was iPhone's most downloaded game in 2008, with eventually 15 million downloads in total. In the late 2010s, virtual reality headsets like Oculus Rift was our last hope of rhythm games making a comeback in the homes. Rock Band desperately tried to make their own comeback in 2017 with their VR version called, what do you know? Rock Band VR. I couldn't find a lot of information on how it did, but it didn't seem to have pretty mixed reviews. It no longer follows the traditional strict note by note you need to hit in order to score well, but seems to take inspiration from actual guitar chord progressions and just freestyling it up. Honestly, it seems pretty complex and something I couldn't really understand after reading on it myself. Maybe something you just gotta try. But in 2021, Harmonix, who made Rock Band, was acquired by Epic Games. Sound familiar? And if you know Epic Games, they own one of the largest games to date, Fortnite. And in 2023, just only last year, Fortnite released a game mode called Fortnite Festival, which took the mechanics of Rock Band and put it within its own platform. Probably the biggest rhythm game in the last decade, anyways, would be a game called Beat Saber. Beat Saber is a VR game designed around cutting colored cubes in time with a song's beat using your hands. It quickly became the top selling and highest rated VR game on Steam at the time of its release. Unfortunately, other than those that I just mentioned, there really hasn't been a whole lot of other rhythm games that have come out, at least that have really taken off like they used to in the golden era. So, what happened to rhythm games? They rose to fame as a perfect storm of innovation, physical interaction, and cultural relevance in the late 90s and 2000s. But as trends shifted and the market became oversaturated, their moment in the spotlight unfortunately faded. The magic of rhythm games was in their ability to make us feel like rock stars, dancers, and drummers, even if we were just stomping on a plastic mat or strumming on a plastic guitar. They brought people together, whether it was at arcades, house parties, or living rooms, and gave us unforgettable memories of jamming out with friends or mastering impossible tracks. But the rise of digital first entertainment, mobile gaming, and more convenient ways to consume music slowly pushed rhythm games out of the mainstream. The cost of entry, storage space, and physical accessories became hurdles that modern gaming trends just don't have anymore. Yet the genre hasn't completely disappeared. Games like Just Dance, Beat Saber, and even community-driven products like Step Mania show there's still love for rhythm-based gameplay today. While they may not dominate the gaming world like they once did, their legacy lives on, especially in arcades, VR, and the hearts of nostalgic gamers like me. So while we may never see a full comeback of the golden era of DDR and Guitar Hero, their spirit remains alive. And who knows? Maybe one day someone will just crack the code on how to bring these rhythm games back home. At least I hope so. Until then, I guess I'll just keep fighting for my turn on the DDR machines at arcades. What do you think? Do you think rhythm games are completely gone, or do you think they'll ever have a comeback? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell icon to be notified of when my next video comes out. Thanks all. I love you. Bye.